This conference will now be recorded.
Morning, everybody. Kelly Hammer is unable to be here in person, so I will walk us through the meeting today. And as our first order of business, I believe there are changes to the agenda.
At your, we'll actually go through roll call first, sorry.
Okay, sorry, roll call. Thank you.
Ms. Hammer Levy, Dr. Flewelling,
Here.
Ms. Allen, here, Mr. Furness, Dr. Hirshorn.
Here.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, Dr. Moyer, Mr. Provenzano, Dr. Day.
Here.
Mr. Alashewski.
Here.
Ms. Brown.
Here.
Mr. Preman.
Here.
Mr. Cooley,
Here, online.
Mr. Glicksberg,
Here.
Ms. Powers.
Here.
Ms. Kroll.
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Bernal Leon. Here. Ms. Kessler. Ms. Bendixson.
Here.
Mr. Pratt.
Here.
Ms. Burks.
Present, online.
Have a quorum.
Okay, now let's talk about the agenda.
There is one updated agenda item and it relates to agenda item 10, the old Tampa Bay Assembly Capacity Assessment Contractor Selection. At your places is the updated agenda item. Be happy to answer any questions at the time that agenda item comes up on the formal recommendations files in that update.
Okay.
Ask for motion 17.
Oh, okay. All right, is there a motion to accept the change to the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is the minutes from the last meeting, August 11th, 2023. Those are in the packet. It's not an action item.
It is.
It is? Okay. So those are located in your packet, page 4. We have a motion to accept the meeting minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Okay. Second? Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? Okay, motion passes. Next, are there any citizens here who wish to comment on general items to the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first item, our next item, which is a discussion item. It's the fiscal year 2023 audit service plan overview and timeline. We have
Yep, we have two presenters. If you could recall at the last board meeting in August, we went out for a request for quotes for audit services for fiscal year 2023 through 2027. Rivera Gadamer was selected to be our auditor over that time period. They're coming here today to give you all a general overview of what we anticipate for their audit process that we'll be bringing back to the board at the February board meeting for formal approval. So with that, I'll turn it over to them. They have a short presentation to kind of highlight some of that process to you all.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed. Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Davis. I'm the shareholder with Rivera Ford & Maroon Company. We're pleased to be back here again this year. Last year was our first year working with you all. And then now we're excited to be under a new contract this year to continue working with the Estuary program over the next several years. Up on the screen, you'll see we have an audit service plan. This really just goes over a lot of our required communications with y'all during the planning process of the upcoming audit. And so we're going to walk through this report for you all today. Feel free to ask questions throughout the process, provide any inputs. Again, we're here to serve you all new to the readings. So this is most of your process and the documents. So starting on page 1, it's really just a summary of the repair station chart. Move forward. There we go. This really just goes over who's doing rules here. And so myself, I am the account administrator, which means I'm responsible for signing the report and the overall audit. Since you all also have some federal and state funds that come through this type of funding that you receive, your audit is also required to go through a secondary quality control review, which we have in our office. Stephen Douglas, he's actually our designated quality partner for the government quality standards of the AICPA. So he'll be responsible for making sure that everything that we do as a team is in accordance with all professional standards. Should any issues arise as well, we also have Sam Lazara in our office. He's one of our senior shareholders, and really just is there if we need him for anything. The engagement supervisor again this year is Elise Leach, who's joined me today as well. She'll introduce herself shortly, and she'll be joined by some of our staff in our office to go really dive into a lot of the details. And so when you go to page 2, this is really just a summary where they just went over. So we'll go to page 3. And so on page 3 really just goes over our responsibilities and your responsibilities as well through the. So our responsibility in accordance with professional standards, which we're following U.S. generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, as well as uniform guidance. So several different standards that we have to follow. Is that we're engaged to provide an opinion on your financial statements and whether they are materially stated. You know, our ultimate goal is an unmodified opinion. And so we're shooting for that. Everything, we don't have any issues. And what that really means is that any grantors, citizens, anyone who's relying on your financial statements to make an informed decision, our audit opinion allow them to say that these are reliable financial statements. We're going to be providing reasonable assurance, which is not absolute assurance. Really what that means is we're going to be using risk-based auditing approach. We'll be using sampling, looking at high-risk areas throughout the audit process. And with that, we'll also focus in on compliance with all the rules with your. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Elise real quick. She's kind of going to go over the details of the areas and the primary focus areas. If you back page, there you go.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Elise Leach. I'm an audit supervisor with Rivera Mortimer, and I'm super happy to be back working with you guys again this year. So very briefly, I'm going to go over the primary focus areas for the audit this year. As you'll see, we have internal controls listed. Generally, we perform and test controls over cash disbursements and payroll process. For cash and investments, we confirm the balances with the bank and review reconciliations that are performed at month end and year end. For grant receivables and revenue, we utilize a grant report that is contract specific to help tie out year end receivables as well as revenues and any grant expenditures for the year. For accounts receivable and revenues, we select a sample of license plate revenues as well as membership dues to perform testing over. For capital assets, we test additions and disposals during the year. For payables and accrued expenses, we review the payables aging and perform testing over payments made subsequent to year end, as well as recalculating the payroll accrual at year end. For pension liabilities and disclosures, we help management with reporting the journal entries needed for pension contributions and liabilities as it relates to the actuarial report at the year end. And then for net position, classifications and restrictions, we reconcile the classifications and restrictions for the purposes of the financial statements. And then with that, I'm going to turn it back to Julie.
Thank you, Elise. All right, now the fun part this year, there's another year of more new standards. In the coming years, there's going to be even more. And so we're here to work involved in that process. Briefly talking with staff prior to the meeting. It looks like this year, this new GASB standard hopefully won't have a significant impact. But if you remember last year, we implemented the new lease standard. So leases are now on the balance sheet with like receivables, payables relating to leases. Well, in GASB world, they came up and said, well, hey, you might have some software costs as well that's multi-year that you've already contracted with, that you've agreed to pay these amounts. So those, much like leases, will also go onto the balance sheet. So we'll work with the team through that process. That's included in what we're doing and making sure that's our tentative time plan this year is much like similar to last year. Really getting started on some preliminary planning, getting some request lists, confirmations out, things of that nature. And we'll really dive into the bulk of what Elise was mentioning in December timeframe. In January, February is where we'll work on wrapping up. That's typically the timeframe that the state issues all the pension reports, is in the January timeframe, which would be the last piece of information we need to be able to meet your February board meetings. And with that, at the very end of our report today, we have independence, conflicts of interest, confidentiality. We're pleased to report we've evaluated independence. We have no conflicts to report to you all. And then on the next page, we're required to report to you all as well that we meet all continuing education requirements in accordance with professional standards. And then lastly, our lovely peer review report. So this is our audit opinion. So we get audited as well, more of a compliance audit that we're following all professional standards, which is on the very last page of the report. And really, just to kind of let you all know, this report we do every 3 years. So you'll see it was reported in 2021. And so as we're wrapping up your audit, we'll be getting going on our own internal audit as well at that time frame. And once we get that final report, we are required to share it with you all. We're pleased to report we have no findings in our audit report. So fingers crossed we stay in that compliance. And I will say that part of that process, they're required to select governmental audits. So they typically look at agencies such as yourself in that audit process, and then specifically use all that we're in compliance with all professional standards. So with that, I want to see if anyone has any questions for us.
Any questions for Julie? See any?
All right, well, that's all we have for you all. So thank you again for having us today. We appreciate your time.
Okay. Moving on, our next item is the quarterly financial report and final 2023 program-wide budget.
Yeah, on page 10 of the packet outlines basically our activities through the full year of fiscal year 2023 through the fourth quarter. This will be the basis for the audit that Julie and her team will be looking at in terms of our overall activity as a program. So in general, just wanted to point out, we expected a little bit higher activity in terms of revenues and expenditures for the fiscal year, both at the initial budget onset and when we made a mid-year budget amendment back at the May meeting. So in total, we're seeing about 70% of activity in terms of revenue, which brings us up to about 2.1 million in total. And on the expense side, we were recognized about 76% of what we expected in the initial and amended budget, so about 2.35 million. There's a couple of footnotes that I put on the report just to bring to your attention because there are some significant deviations from what we budgeted. And a lot of this is related to both our where we're at in terms of both revenue and expenditure projections of delays in project implementation. So we didn't collect any in-kind revenues this year for partners or expenditures documentation. That's just going to carry over into the next fiscal year. We were expecting 2 projects, documentation on in-kind revenues from 2 projects from partners. This past fiscal year, we didn't see that. So again, that's just going to carry over into the next fiscal year. On the expense side, there's 3 footnotes related to our communication services, printing expenses, and other expenses. We're a little bit over in terms of what we anticipated budget-wise for those expenses. And we're just footnoting there those deviations from what our expectations were. Under communication services, there's additional licenses and software we procured for new staff coming on, so it's a little bit higher than what we anticipated. On the printing expenses, I mentioned this at prior board meetings during quarterly reports that we incurred some expenses at the beginning part of the year, printing out some of our State of the Bay reports. And at the tail end of the year, we incurred a little bit more printing expenses related to the economic valuation study. So that's recognized on our books in fiscal year 2023. And it's a little bit higher than what we anticipated in our original budget items. On the other expense side, we through publication of our initial budget back in August, we had a fairly significant bill for legal ads in a local periodical. It's a little bit higher than what we expected, as well as an additional sponsorship for a local organization that came in and was requested towards this tail end of this last quarter. So that's recognized again in this fiscal year. It goes into the overall items that would be audited, but I just wanted to bring those to y'all's attention. They're footnote down the bottom. Any activity that we didn't recognize this fiscal year in terms of federal grants or other grant programs, those projects are still ongoing and will just be recognized in the subsequent fiscal year. So as we develop the initial budget this past August, we'll make any adjustments based on the pace of project completion and bring that back to the board with any mid-year budget amendments for our current fiscal year. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions related to the final budget. But like I mentioned, this will be the basis for what goes to the auditor and what we're working on with our accounting firm for their review.
Any questions for Ed? No? Okay, this is an action item. The recommended action is that we recommend the policy board accept the quarterly financial report and adopt the final fiscal year 2023 program-wide budget. We have a motion? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. The next item is the fiscal year 2024 Florida Estuaries Alliance and TBEP legislative priorities.
So on page 11 of your packet outlines what we have identified as priorities that we would like to communicate both to our state and federal elected officials within the region. And a lot of the information that's contained on this page is similar to what was presented last year. There's a couple of deviations and updates on additional priorities that we wanted to convey both to the state and federal electeds. And I'll point them out now, but for the most part, a lot of these priorities are similar to what we've presented in the past. So on the state side, we want to continue to educate our state officials on the importance of continuing to protect and acquire properties to restore key habitats, not only in the central part of the state, but for some of the river corridors that connect to the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So we want to encourage our state representatives to look at opportunities to preserve and protect some of the key habitats that we still have remaining within the watershed. We also want to recognize that strong local fertilizer ordinance have been in place in the Tampa Bay region for quite some time. So we view that as one of the tools in the toolbox that we want to maintain into the future. It's one of the key actions to reduce the amount of nutrient loads that are coming from stormwater related runoff in our urbanizing watersheds. So we want to educate our state electeds on the importance of those local fertilizer ordinances, as well as continue to highlight some of the key areas where we need significant action, namely the old Tampa Bay segment where we continue to struggle with water quality and significant seagrass loss. So the agenda item 10 related to coming up with the nutrient budget for old Tampa Bay and interrogating additional management interventions that need to be made is something that we want to continue to communicate with our elected officials on. You know, it's not only nutrients, it's these other management interventions that we think are needed to be implemented to get that Bay segment back on track. So overall, those are sort of the highlights on the state elected side. On the federal side, we want to recognize that the Little Manatee River was included in last year's omnibus appropriations bill for a study for consideration of it as a wild and scenic river. We just want to encourage our federal representatives to see that, ensure that study is seen through. So it's completed by the federal agencies and some determination is made on whether or not the Little Manatee River should be a wild and scenic river. So I have opportunities usually to go up to Washington, D.C. and meet with our local delegation in Congress, usually in the springtime period. We have an Association National Estuary Programs meeting planned for April of next year, and that will give me an opportunity to make these points to those federally elected officials, and hopefully, again, we'll see some action and momentum towards that study being completed soon. So Rob, I'm also interested in hearing any feedback from y'all as the management board to see if there are other priorities that are not highlighted in this list that you would like me to bring to either our state or federal elected officials. But with that, I'll stop my presentation on these.
Any questions for Ed or input? Priorities, discussion.
We need a motion.
Okay. So I need a motion. The recommended action is that we recommend the policy board approve the fiscal year 2024 Florida Estuaries Alliance and Estuary Program legislative priorities. Is there a motion?
Solution.
Do we have a second? Any discussion? Bunch? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Meyer, you gonna present it up there? Do you want me to share the presentation?
If you want to share, if you have enough, otherwise I have it ready too.
Okay, the next item is an interim CCMP update.
It's not showing.
Okay, thanks Ed for playing on your slides. I also want to introduce Dr. Jennifer Schaefer. She's participating remotely and she's also available to answer any questions that you all might have. So the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan is our guiding document as a community about how to protect and restore Tampa Bay and make sure that the community is involved in its protection and restoration. We last updated the CCMP. It was a major revision back in 2017. And this interim update is representing a 5-year interim look to make sure that everything is up to speed, that it's reflecting those projects that have been completed between now and 2017, and any changes to major guiding documents that you all have already approved and we have submitted to EPA. So the intent of this update is not to overhaul the CCMP, it's merely to make those minor changes to reflect documents and research that's already been completed and approved by this board. Dr. Schaefer has presented at the last meeting, as well as made presentations to both our Community Advisory Committee and our Technical Advisory Committee to go through and make sure that many of the items which we are recommending minor revisions to are reflecting their input. Additionally, we've also contracted with folks who are going out and doing independent stakeholder research to make sure that we are reflecting the needs of the community beyond just our management conference. Okay, Ed?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, China made it bigger.
That's all right. So these are requirements that come to us that flow down through EPA as part of a checklist and review process. And so I just want to remind you at the outset that we're at the point where this is an action item. And so all of the comments and changes that we proposed, those text changes were all linked in the agenda, and I'm going to run through each of them today. But we're asking you to approve all of those text changes, and then should you approve it, we'll be sending it to EPA for their review and hopefully their concurrence and approval. So that's just sort of the high-level overview of what I'll be talking about today. And you can go to the next slide. So for those of you who've read our CCMP, it's a very big document. And so there are a number of changes just because the scope and breadth of our work spans so far. So I really do want to take a little bit of time to run through each of these. But just to orient you a little bit with the CCMP, there are goals, there are action plans, and then there's a series of items within each action plan that's associated with an action, an activity, and then additional information about the costs of those projects, the timeline for when those things are due, who is the responsible party, because as you all know, as a staff of 9, the estuary program doesn't do all of this on our own. We rely on you as our partners to implement this important work. So I'll be going over all of the changes to any of those categories and try and be summarizing that along the way. So the first thing I want to call your attention to is the changes that we're recommending to the goals. This listing is it's not inclusive of every single goal in the CCMP. I am only highlighting the goals that have changes. So the 2 goals that we're changing on this slide are representing a water and sediment quality goal and bay habitat goals. These changes are really reflecting what was already adopted in the 2020 Habitat Master Plan. So we're updating that seagrass target from 38,000 acres to 40,000 acres in the water quality goal. And then we're listing out the full suite of habitats and the goals that we've identified in that Habitat Master Plan to make sure that that the CCMP is consistent with the already approved and accepted Habitat Master Plan. Next slide, Ed. We also are making several minor changes to the public access and public education and involvement goals. The first, to public access, we're adding the word equitable into the goal for public access. And that's largely reflecting a number of the projects that we've been supporting through things like the Bay Mini Grant Program and the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund Program. It's also reflecting feedback that was offered to us by stakeholders who were interviewed, and their responses were documented in an equitable engagement stakeholder memo. And then it also is consistent with our approach that we've outlined in our bipartisan infrastructure law equity strategy, which you all approved earlier this year. In the public education and involvement action, we've made a very minor change. We are moving away from using the language of citizens to community members, because community members is more inclusive. So I think the intent is the same. We're just trying to be inclusive in our language. And then finally, I want to call your attention to change to the climate change goals. For those of you who've been with the program for a long time, you might recall about a decade ago, the policy board provided guidance to the estuary program staff to focus climate change efforts on sea level rise related research. But in the intervening decade, our work has really come to encompass the full scope of climate change stressors, including things like changing temperature, changing precipitation patterns, ocean acidification, and sea level rise. And so what we've done is made revisions to this goal to reflect the nature of that broadened research approach. And also we thought it was important to include community resilience in this goal as well, because community and informed, engaged, and responsible community is sort of the third leg of our stool. And the region has made quite a bit of progress with respect to standing up the Tampa Bay Regional Resiliency Coalition, hosted here through the Regional Planning Council. And so we wanted this goal to reflect that full breadth of activities that the region has been undertaking over the past decade or so. So that makes it through all the changes that we're proposing to the goals. Do you all have any comments or questions or things you want to talk about there on any of those items? Dick.
Not a question, but just a comment. I think they're all very appropriate and laudable changes. So I'm very supportive of everything you've got.
Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who were here back in the 2015 to 2016 time period when we were going through the CCMP update, you'll know this was a 2-year process. We were bringing actions to you at pretty much every board meeting, every technical advisory committee meeting to review these things. So what I'm trying to distill here is a whole lot of information. And so I'm trying to give you a high level overview, make sure you understand where all the changes are. But understand that we did this over a 2-year period before, and I'm going to do it in like 20 minutes today. So, all right, you ready? You with me? So what this, for the entire CCMP, for all of the action plans, actions, we have this table, which is summarizing where we made changes, so you can sort of see what kinds of things we're changing along the way. So I'm going to give you this overview, and then I'm going to delve in and give you like the specifics on what were changed. So in case you didn't closely read the 200+ page document that was provided, you should feel confident that you understand what we have included in the changes here. So right now I'm talking about some of our major water quality actions: water quality, stormwater runoff, and atmospheric deposition. You'll see that most of the changes that we're providing here relate to either the activities that were listed, the timeframes, or the deliverables that were identified. Next slide, Ed. So some of the changes that we made in the activities were with respect to the background information, the sort of literature review that's provided in advance. Those changes that we included are all reflecting things, again, that you have already, that are projects that are completed, that were approved by this board, or plans or documents that were reviewed and approved by this board. So things like the 2022 Reasonable Assurance Plan for Tampa Bay that was submitted to DEP and EPA back in December of 2022. There were a number of updates related to the nitrogen loads that were documented over that recent 5-year period, the amount of money that you all spent to offset the nitrogen loading that was there, and then the overall status and trends, particularly related to Old Tampa Bay. We wanted to make sure that those data were accurately reflected in the background. We've also done quite a bit of work in partnership with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. So we wanted to make sure that we're reflecting the best information with respect to pyridinium in particular. And we also completed the NOAA the Restore Actionable Science Grant, which laid out a research plan. And there are several items that we've also reflected in the background for that work that has been completed. And then we also want to credit where changes have been made. So many of you had passed fertilizer ordinances back in the 2010 period, but Hillsborough County over this review period actually updated their ordinance to become more in line with the strong fertilizer ordinances in our region. And we wanted to make sure that that information was also reflected in the background information. In terms of the changes to the activities, we want to make sure that we're capturing the assimilative capacity assessment for Old Tampa Bay. And so there are activities that are reflecting that work that you all will be discussing later in this board meeting. We also intend to modernize the action plan database, which is where you all are entering information in terms of the projects that you're completing to load. We've heard that's a pain point for many of you. And so we intend to improve that action plan database, and we've listed that as an activity. And then we've also heard both in the Southwest Florida Water Management District's updated swim plan that was adopted just a month or so ago. And through much of our discussions around the Old Tampa Bay segment in particular, although this is also something that's come up in some of the lower bay segments, but this connection between nitrogen loading, macroalgae, and seagrass coverage. And so there's changes to actions that are making sure that we're characterizing the macroalgae component as well. No changes to any of the responsible parties here. We have changed some of the timelines to reflect work that's been completed. For example, we've partnered with the other Southwest Florida National Estuary Programs to complete a nutrient management framework for tidal tributaries. So that's been updated to completed. And there are several actions in there related to expanding landscape BMP certification and making sure that we add an atmospheric deposition monitoring station within the Tampa Bay watershed that had really aggressive timelines, which we've now updated to reflect as delayed. But we still hope to make progress on these items before the end of this 10-year planning cycle is up. No changes to costs and funding sources. And then in the deliverables, we're merely specifying the format to open science formats, which is something that we've committed to in the strategic plan that you all have reviewed and adopted. All right. Water quality is a big part of our plan, so there's a whole other slide for it. This is the section on wastewater discharges. Here you'll see there's a variety of changes across the wastewater actions. Some are reflecting changes to activities. There's a few changes to responsible parties. There are updates within those timeframes as well. We've made a change to some cost and funding opportunities, and then again, change to some deliverables. Now I'm going to go into that in detail. Next slide. For the wastewater actions, the background information that we've updated in this section, again, reflecting that reasonable assurance plan that we submitted back in 2022. So things that you've all seen, just making sure that we're consistent with the most recent numbers that were reported in that plan. Also over this time period, the Southwest Florida Water Management District adopted the 2020 Regional Water Supply Plan. This included updated information about things like the reclaimed water and wastewater treatment quantities there. And so we're making sure that that information is all up to date with the best available data from that plan. So also this section is reflecting new legislation that was passed in this time period, particularly information related to the Clean Waterways Act and Senate Bill 64, which are guiding many of the actions and activities that you all are embarking on. And we want to make sure that we are supporting those in the background text. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that we're acknowledging completed research on some of the effects of compound flooding and what that means in terms of wastewater treatment plant infrastructure vulnerability. So there were several projects that were funded through the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, and this has been a topic that was very much top of mind as we were finalizing this iteration of the CCMP, and we did complete some research along the way. For changes to the activities in wastewater, it's largely focused on these things related to those legislative changes. And so 2 things I want to highlight for you. One is we're including the Clean Waterways Act identifies this issue of addressing stricter nutrient removal requirements, performance standards for septic tanks. And so we've included language that's reflective of that in the activities. And then we talked a lot about different wastewater treatment things that needed to happen in one of the actions. And we've also added this idea of upgrading your wastewater treatment facilities, particularly as it relates to things like Senate Bill 64 and the potential need to go to treatment beyond advanced wastewater treatment standards. So we've added language in the activities to support that. In the responsible parties, the changes that we are making are mostly to reflect, again, the changing responsibilities that were outlined in the Clean Waterways Act to include DEP as a responsible party for some of the septic related activities. And then we also have an action in there that's describing a potential working group on ways that we can tackle things like septic to sewer conversion, or ways that we can perform homeowner education about the enhanced septic systems. And so we've added both the Southwest Florida Water Management District, like the education and outreach folks, the communications team there, and the Agency on Bay Management as potential partners there and working group participants. The timeframes that we updated relate to the completion of the Pipe Up campaign, which was a social marketing, the phase 1 of that campaign, which was a social marketing campaign designed to help homeowners to learn that they have a lateral sewer line and to get one inspected and then repaired or replaced if in fact they find out they have an issue. And then we delayed this regional septic working group because there's been no progress to date. And so that's something that, again, we still hope to be able to do, but there hasn't been a clear champion or any progress there. This one, we made some changes to the potential funding sources to support this work, largely because of the significant influx of federal resources that are available to support these kinds of projects. So we want to make sure that we're recognizing those additional federal funding opportunities for things like the bipartisan infrastructure law, of which resilient wastewater infrastructure is one of the approved restoration themes that's been through this board, as well as like things like the Inflation Reduction Act and others. And then finally, in the deliverables, we had identified the reasonable assurance plan, which was already completed. And so we've updated this to reflect the next reasonable assurance plan that will be due to DEP and EPA in 2027, which will also fall within the time horizon of this plan. Any questions about changes to wastewater? You guys are troopers. Okay, we're still in water quality. So the next sections we're going to be focusing on are contaminants of concern and pathogens. You'll see most of the changes here. There's one small change in pathogens, but the majority of the changes are in this contaminants of concern section, and they relate to the activities, the responsible parties, and the time frame. Next slide. So most of those changes to the activities in the background are reflecting updated research that was completed by Eckerd College on microplastics. At the time we were writing the 2017 CCMP, there had only been very preliminary assessments that were done out of Eckerd College, and since then they have formalized a methodology for collecting and detecting microplastics, and some of the findings from that subsequent research were counter to the original preliminary studies that were presented. So we wanted to make sure that we were accurately communicating that information on the best information available on the state of microplastics. We also have done a lot of work funded through the Trash Free Waters program with EPA on different trash collection devices, and so we're wanting to reflect some of those changes. There's been quite a bit of progress that you all have initiated with partners like academic partners like the University of South Florida on various microbial source tracking projects. So we wanted to make sure that we were capturing some of the progress that was made there. And then we've also worked with both Tampa Bay Water as well as the University of South Florida to advance some research on PFAS concentrations in sediments and water quality and in fish tissue within Tampa Bay. And so we wanted to make sure that we know that PFAS is an issue that's top of mind for many of you, and we wanted to make sure that we're reflecting the best information there as well. The actual changes to the activities in these sections are relatively minor. It's to, again, reflect that, to add, when we list out the possible contaminants of concern, PFAS wasn't included. So we explicitly are listing PFAS now. When we talked about different participatory science programs related to plastics pollution, we're calling out Nerval Patrol, which is a partnership that's Gulf-wide that we've been participating in. And so we wanted to call that out as well. And then there are several activities in that that are relating to how we message. Now that there's much more information that's available about when there's a health advisory for different beaches, whether it's a county beach monitored by the health department or monitored by a local government. And that information for a lay audience, they might not know how to perceive risk associated with that information. And so we have some specific recommendations here in terms of ways we can improve public messaging and understanding about what those potential fecal indicator bacteria might mean and when they actually pose a human health hazard. We've made several changes to the responsible parties here, adding some academic partners for the microplastics monitoring methodology that weren't previously listed, but they have done the heavy lifting on that work. So we want to make sure we're crediting them and their continued efforts there. We've also added the Keep America Beautiful affiliates for some of the plastic pollution prevention programs because we know that they are strong educators on that. Many of them have developed and partnered. So we wanted to be sure we're recognizing them as a responsible party for that as well. And then the major change to the time frame of what's delayed is we have 2 sediment quality action plans that are identified in several locations, one for McKay Bay and one for Largo Inlet. And we haven't made any progress on those, so we're updating the timeline to delayed. Again, we're a small crew, we're all very busy, we can do what we can do. So we think this is important, but we don't want to have a falsely aggressive timeline there. Any questions about pathogens or contaminants of concern? Next slide. All right, we're into habitats. This is where I expected the bulk of the changes to be. There was more changes than I expected overall, I will tell you that. But again, because the Habitat Master Plan is such an important foundational guiding document, and there are references to it that ripple throughout all of these Bay Habitat actions, this is where many changes were reflected. And so in the Bay Habitat section, you'll see changes to the activities, to the responsible parties, to the time frames, and to the costs and funding. Next slide. So the big thing, we want to make sure that what we adopted in the 2020 Habitat Master Plan is clearly communicated and consistently communicated in the CCMP. So many of the changes are reflecting, an effort to make those make the background information consistent with what's in the latest Habitat Master Plan. We're also really excited that we have an updated swim plan for the first time in 24 years. And so we wanted to make sure that everything that was identified in the swim plan is also reflected in these habitat actions because it's such an important way that we're accomplishing this habitat restoration work. We're reflecting some of the completed research that's gone on. Obviously, habitats are very important to us all and many of our partners, and so there's quite a bit of research that's been conducted between 2017 and now, including research on the function of constructed freshwater wetlands, work that we've initiated with the University of Florida on seagrass propeller scar analysis and associated social marketing campaign, mapping of hard bottom that we've done in conjunction with Pinellas County and the Southwest Florida Water Management District. A lot of work that we've done on oyster habitats, identifying where suitable locations for oysters are in the bay, and also how we can effectively monitor oyster restoration projects. And then we've also been working with a variety of different partners to advance participatory science efforts to establish vertical oyster gardens on people's backyards. And so the background information is reflecting all of that work. The activities that we've changed, the major changes that we've made to the activities, One is adding in some additional information that's reflecting feedback that we got during the climate change vulnerability and adaptation action planning steps, as well as research priorities discussion that we had with the technical advisory. So recognizing that we are currently designing many of our coastal habitat restoration projects to accommodate sea level rise, but we can also build in other design criteria which confer resilience to both fish and wildlife as well as the habitats themselves. So we've added language to reflect some of the other ways that we can consider climate change in our habitat restoration designs. The big change here is we actually are proposing to delete what was formerly BH10, that activity, and merge the relevant activities into BH1. BH10 was formerly based on something called the Freshwater Wetlands Master Plan. It was a standalone master plan that was completed in the early 2010s that related to those upland wetland features, and it was also based on the restoring the balance paradigm. And so when we updated the 2020 Habitat Master Plan, we updated those targets and goals for the full suite of coastal habitats, including the freshwater wetlands that are in the more upland portions of the watershed. And we moved away from the restoring the balance paradigm to the maximizing the potential paradigm. So much of the information that was included in those actions needed to be updated or incorporated into that implement the Habitat Master Plan action, because it's now part of the Habitat Master Plan and not a standalone document. And then finally, based on several conversations and interviews that we had with expert stakeholders, there's also been quite a bit of discussion around seagrass transplanting. We had seagrass transplanting activities included in that 2017 CCMP update. But the way that we're accomplishing that work now and over these past 5 years has changed somewhat. And so we're reflecting that changing approach in the activities and the background information. And we're also thinking about ways that seagrass transplanting, should we have information and data to support it, how we might be able to do things like introduce genetic diversity and or positive viruses that could enhance seagrass coverage and the resilience of our seagrass meadows in Tampa Bay. So these are very much research-oriented kinds of activities, but because there's been some attention and progress made on this front, we wanted to make sure that the activities were accurately characterizing those changes. Minor changes to the responsible parties, mostly because so we've committed to conduct a critical coastal habitat assessment every 3 to 5 years. For some of these assessments, we've used private consultants. For some, we've partnered with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So we wanted to make sure that it was capturing the suite of potential partners if we go out to contract who might help us support that work. Lots of changes to the timeframes here, reflecting the work that was completed on the Habitat Master Plan. And then there are a number of activities that are delayed. These are primarily all related to integrating our work and better partnering with mitigation bankers. This is something that there was a series of recommendations included in both the CCMP and the updated Habitat Master Plan. Carrie has been working with the Habitat Restoration Consortium to try and advance these issues, but while those activities are listed in both of those foundational documents, there doesn't seem to be a corresponding interest within the management community, and so those actions are all delayed, and we're not sure, it's not work that will advance if there's not a corresponding interest within the management community overall. And then finally, we wanted to add an additional funding source because the state has had included a line item appropriation to support seagrass transplanting throughout the state of Florida, some of that work which is occurring within Tampa Bay. So we wanted to recognize that funding source. There's more habitat stuff too, but you guys have any questions about those things?
Yeah. Was there any consideration for looking at the health of seagrass? Because I think that is an identified knowledge gap. You know, the district does the seagrass mapping, but it's a present, not present type of mapping. So there's really not this large scale effort to look at the quality of the seagrass that's there.
Well, in the transect monitoring that all of the partners also participated, we do condition assessments there, and so there's that. And I think that that is also covered in some of the foundational research that we would do, looking at the genetic diversity and whether or not there are viruses present, whether or not they're pathogenic or not. So I think that's some of the foundational work. And so I think that overall condition assessment is included in both the work that is ongoing by the partners and then work that we have proposed and have been sort of initiating discussions around. Is that sufficient?
Yes, I think it'll help bridge that information gap and maybe give some insight onto can we predict when it's happening versus just that it happened. Agreed. Some of those things. And one other thing with the mitigation success, I know that what you said is until there's interest from that community to look into some of those timeframes and adjust. I know the district has gone back and not for mitigation, but just for any swim restoration projects and has been evaluating the success of those using some criteria. So that's available if there's interest in that community that potentially to use as a basis. Now, we're not looking at mitigation specifically.
Yeah.
So the criteria would likely need to be adjusted, but could be a foundation.
I suspect Carrie would love to present that information to the Habitat Restoration Consortium, and we could see what lessons could be transferable for that kind of thing. That's really helpful to know. Thank you.
And just to add to that, there has been some discussion, with the co-chairs of the committee and with Tom Reese about pursuing some of this, mitigation kind of partnership. So, hopefully we can make some progress on that too.
Okay, we're rounding out the Bay Habitats actions. There's not as many major changes here. One of the biggest things that should stand out is that proposed deletion of Bay Habitats 10, which was to implement the freshwater wetland master plan implementation. So that's a major change to delete in action. We have several changes in activities related to some of the Bay Habitats and also the freshwater inflow, and then changes to some of the responsible parties. All right, so again, the background information, updating the Habitat Master Plan. We also, many of these actions in the freshwater inflow section are related to work that Southwest Florida Water Management does through their minimum flows and levels program. And so we've updated the timelines and the details to reflect the progress that they've made and then the adjustments that they've made to the MFL priority list and schedule, and the work that's been done on the reevaluation reports for the different MFLs that have already been established. So primarily for things like the Lower Hillsborough River just completed an assessment period, and so there were some changes to the findings there. And then there are the district is currently adopting a minimum flow for the lower Little Manatee River. And then we have some delays in terms of rivers that were identified, like the Manatee River and the Green. So those are all described in there, and we're trying to be consistent with that most recent reports out of the Water Management District. Again, for the activities, I told you we're merging BH10, the relevant portions with BH1, and then deleting those that are no longer applicable. And then there's also some language in there, again, just trying to be more reflective of our overall approach and the work that we've done on some of the restoration criteria. So we're adding language about adding opportunities for upslope habitat migration, because this was something that was identified pretty clearly and strongly in the Habitat Master Plan. Quite a few additions to responsible parties. I don't think this is like news to anybody. This is just folks that are already kind of doing this work and wanting to make sure that we're, again, characterizing their contributions here. The Agency on Bay Management has been a really incredible partner in convening all of the regulatory agencies and the permitting folks, particularly related to issues on living shorelines. This is also something that's in their wheelhouse because of the Regional Resilience Coalition and the Living Shoreline, or the Resilient Shorelines Working Group. And so we wanted to make sure that we're adding those permitting entities as well as the Agency on Bay Management to those responsible parties. some things that we've completed, so timeframe changes. We have completed a partnership with Tampa Bay Watch, Living Shoreline Monitoring Protocols. And then while we've done a lot of work on tidal tributaries, nutrient management frameworks and other things, we haven't convened a tidal tributaries management coordination working group. You'll know this is something that's important to the program. It's again one of those restoration themes for our bipartisan infrastructure law. We would love to see some kind of knowledge transfer and information sharing amongst folks so that we can improve best practices for holistic management of these systems. But to date, nothing has happened and there is no group formed. And so we're characterizing this as one of those delayed actions. The changes to cost, funding, or deliverables. Okay. Comments, questions? All right, we're into Fish and Wildlife. There's actually a number of changes here to Fish and Wildlife. These were ones that I wasn't necessarily, I figured it out when I got into the document. So I want to make sure I characterize it. Some minor changes to the activities, the responsible parties, some changes to location and to deliverables. Go ahead. So we actually pack a whole lot of information into the background information of these Fish and Wildlife activities. So we're doing things like telling you how many voters are registered, within the 3-county area, and that information changes annually. So we want to make sure we're updating that. We've done a lot of different research partnering on things like scallop recruitment, hard bottom habitats and fish communities, sport fish, and how they're utilizing our restoration site. So a lot of that background was updated to characterize those kinds of things. The activities, the changes to the activities, we are making a push for participatory science. That's something that was included in our strategic plan that you all approved and reviewed. And so there are many opportunities that were listed here and that we're expanding participatory science opportunities in those Fish and Wildlife activities. Initially, the first Fish and Wildlife activity was basically a restatement of the activity, the action to implement the Bay Habitats 1, which is that to implement the Habitat Master Plan. And essentially, I think what we're trying to do is say that we're implementing the Habitat Master Plan for the benefit of fish and wildlife, but it was completely redundant with the action that we already had in Bay Habitats 1. And so we did propose a change to eliminate that to remove the redundancy. And then we've added in recommendations for activities to add monitoring programs for key species to adapt to new conditions and threats, whether it's development related or climate change related. That again is based on these expert elicitation interviews, as well as suggestions that were made during the research priorities update that the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Technical Advisory Committee discussed earlier this summer. There were several changes to responsible parties. Some of them were at the request of the Manatee Awareness Coalition, which is a group that we convene. They want to be specifically named to identify and monitor any proposed changes to manatee protection zones. And then we wanted to change and add some additional partners, including other national estuary programs, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, non-governmental organizations and academic partners, because they've been participating and collaborating on much of this research that we're describing in the activities. Timeframes that were updated. We completed a scallop recruitment study in this 5-year period, and then there has been no progress to convene a task force to look at alternative mechanisms for increased funding to enhance on-water enforcement. That's something that in the CCMP update discussions, folks identified as important. But again, given the management conference that we had today, that group has not been convened and there has not been a real champion to advance that, so that action is delayed. And then finally, the deliverables, there are a few things that we're specifying those open science formats consistent with our strategic plan guidance, and that's to reflect things that we've already been showing you, things like the benthic index, the Nectin index, all of these things which we have developed open science workflows and are conveying this information to you as close to real time as we can. So, any questions on Fish and Wildlife? All right, you're not asleep yet. So, minor changes to dredging and dredge material management and spill prevention and response, mostly related to the activities and the responsible parties. Can you go to the next slide? So over this time period, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completed a regional sediment management plan for Tampa Bay, and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program completed a follow-up dredge hole assessment. So we updated the background to reflect those new reports. And then in the spill prevention and response, we had several big events that we felt like needed to be discussed in the background information, primarily relating to the Piney Point discharge. And then we had specific language in there about oil spills, and since we had a not insignificant oil spill at Port Manatee earlier this year, we also had included a sentence describing that as well. There was also quite a bit of discussion during the 2017 CCMP update around boom maintenance. So to make sure that the booms that we do have in storage are being inspected regularly and are ready to be mobilized in the event that we do have some kind of disaster. And so the area spill committee has actually done some work to advance that, and Hillsborough County is an important partner. As we learned both during the CCMP update and during this interim update. And so we are providing a description of some of the activities that that group has facilitated. That's resulted in one change to the activities to specify that that boom is at E.G. Simmons Park and they are maintaining it and looking at it. We've added responsible parties, the Agency on Bay Management and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Mostly this is in relationship to some of the beneficial dredge material projects that are being proposed throughout the region. ABM has already been convening the partner on many of these topics. Again, we want to reflect that, and we understand that DEP will have a role in some of that as well. Timeframe updates, again, completed those 2 items. So that's the regional sediment management plan and the dredge hole study. And then there are a couple things that are delayed. They're mostly related to research that was identified during the CCMP update in 2017. There was quite a bit of dredging that was going on at that time at the mouth of the bay near Egmont Key. And there was concern about turtles in particular and turtle exclusion devices and how we could research and implement better technology to protect fish and wildlife while dredging activities are going on. We're not aware of any work that's been done on that topic, so we've listed that item as delayed. And then there was also a similar kind of discussion related to beach nourishment activities and potential impacts to wildlife and the development of things like a best practices guide. And again, we're not aware of any progress that's been made on that front. I know those of you who conduct that work, you might have these things internally, but they haven't been shared and adopted region-wide. So what we're doing is listing this as delayed. Comments, questions? We're getting close, guys. This one I'm lumping together, the Invasive Species Action Plan, public access, public education, and involvement. You'll see here a number of changes to the activities, but they're very, very minor changes. Some changes to responsible parties, time frame, the benefits, and the deliverables. Next slide. So again, the background information has a whole lot of specifics in it related to the Bay mini grant that we completed in 2017. So we wanted to update those to include the most recent give a day for the Bay metrics. We also wanted to incorporate all of the things that you've already approved, like our bill equity strategy, our strategic plan, research that we partnered with the Regional Planning Council on for the economic evaluation of Tampa Bay. And then for public access issues, we wanted to recognize progress that our partners in Manatee County have made adopting referendum that allows them to advance their environmental land acquisition program. So the majority of the activities there they're primarily related to this equitable stakeholder engagement memorandum, which is very similar to the bipartisan infrastructural equity strategy. So we're just trying to make sure that there's explicit guidance in there to direct outreach activities that tailor to the interests and the needs of communities, whether they're rural or coastal or urban. We want to make sure that we have like a full suite of offerings that are supporting bringing everyone up to speed with the efforts of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We also want to make sure that we're removing barriers and access to our grant programs. So there's some suggestions for activities in there related to additional technical support that we can provide to underserved communities for our grant writing and project management. We want to increase volunteerism among college students and corporate groups. Again, those were things that were identified in our strategic plan and work that we presented to you, so we're reflecting it there in the activities. We're currently working on updating our communications and outreach plan and intend to come back to the board in 2024 with an updated communications and outreach plan. And so that activity is listed in there as well. We know that there have been a lot of conversations around user conflicts and inequitable access to public lands. So we want to be working to address those user conflicts and inequities in access, and then supporting particularly experiential education opportunities for those underserved communities. If you've never had access to be on the water on a boat, we're trying to provide these kinds of nature-based experiences so people are experiencing the estuary and the watershed firsthand, so they have an opportunity to fall in love with it. And once they fall in love with it, we're quite sure that they'll want to work to protect it and be part of the Tampa Bay restoration story. So we're listing that activity as well. We've added a variety of non-governmental partners and other stakeholders that are identified in that equitable engagement memo, which is very similar to the bill equity strategy that you all have reviewed and approved. Time frame, we have one major change there. It's a delayed item. There's an activity that's listed in the invasive species action plan that's related to creating an inventory and an online database for all of the invasive species that are documented, not just in our watershed, but in the Suncoast SISMA area. And so from all of our review and interviews, that action is delayed as well, and we're not aware of any progress to implement it, although I know that Carrie and some other folks on our staff have invasive species on their radar and are looking to make some progress on some of those indicators moving forward. But right now we're listing it as delayed. And then there were a number of metrics that we specified that were relevant to these categories in the 2021 and 2025 strategic plan. And so we wanted to make sure we specified the same, that we had consistency in the deliverables that were included in the CCMP that are also included in the strategic plan where there was overlap. Questions on public access, involvement, education, species. All right, last year. Climate change and local implementation. Really not major changes here, although we did give this like a really close look. Some changes to some of the climate change activities and responsible parties, and a little bit of changes to the time frame for local implementation and activity related to local implementation. Basically, progress that was made, we adopted a new recommended sea level rise projection for the Tampa Bay area. We have the Regional Resilience Coalition has adopted a Regional Resiliency Action Plan. We've completed a vulnerability assessment and adaptation action plan for our CCMP, and we've completed another iteration of the critical coastal habitat assessment. So there's quite a bit of background information to update there, making sure we're up to date. Several of our partners, notably Hillsborough County, has made quite a bit of progress on voluntary carbon market projects. So habitat restoration or management projects that are storing carbon, whether it's terrestrial or otherwise. So we wanted to reflect that work that has been done. I know Manatee County is also considering similar work out some of their pine flatwood areas. And then many of you recall from a TAC meeting or maybe from the news, some of the work that we're doing looking at things like temperature trends and potential effects on shallow seagrass meadows. And so we're reflecting all of that work that's been ongoing or completed in the background. Generally, the changes that I mentioned are reflecting that broadening of the goal for the climate change action. So we're trying to encapsulate additional climate stressors like temperature, rainfall, in addition to sea level rise. And then the change to the local implementation action, that initial goal was one that was conceptualized to help bridge the gap between what we have in the CCMP here and what you all adopt in your guiding documents in your comprehensive plans. And so we actually made quite a bit of progress partnering with the Regional Planning Council to complete the crosswalk between those two documents to sort of see where everyone's at and make recommendations for model language. Conducted several trainings to get the local planning community up to speed about those tools that are available and the CCMP. So those things were completed, but we understand there's implementation reporting that's happening, that's tied to the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. And so we added in some language that's going to encourage us to make progress on streamlining a process for you all to talk about what work you've completed that's contributing to the CCMP over the next 5 years. So that's the activity addition in the local implementation section. Again, we have a regional resiliency coalition now that we didn't this one, we had the partners for the critical coastal habitat assessment swapped from what we had in the habitat section. We listed private consultants, but not FWC. So we're adding FWC here for consistency. That's it.
Oh, I just wanted to mention or ask with the vulnerability assessments, I think local governments are required to do vulnerability assessments. So I don't know if that's already reflected in the background. You want to consider maybe reflecting that as well.
Yes, it is. It's generically, I didn't try to delve into everyone's detailed vulnerability assessments, but there's like a nod to that going on. Okay. So I think that covers everything. I know, like I said, it was a lot of reading and I wanted you all to be very comfortable with everything that we were proposing. So that's why I walked through it in this level of detail. The next step, should the boards approve it, we'll submit it to EPA for review. It'll include not only the language changes that I went over here today, but also updated research priorities and an updated finance plan, which are elements of the CCMP, which were also provided to you in the background information for the packet. Our intent is to move this away from a PDF eZine, from an Adobe eZine product, into open science web-based format. And so we'll be working on that for the early part of next year. And we'll be bringing that back to the board sometime next year to share that progress as well. And then, like I mentioned, we'll also be working on an updated communications and outreach plan. Those are the next steps. And then this is an action item. So here's the recommended action. I'm happy to answer any questions, take any discussion, or we can move on today. And I really want to thank Jennifer Schaefer for being my partner through all of this. It is no small feat, and she was an invaluable help to get this to the point that it's at right now. So thank you, Jennifer.
I just want to add, I hope you got from the scale and scope of the presentation that Maya just gave. This was no small task to review the full comprehensive management plan. Maya's done a tremendous work in leading that with the help of Schaefer Consulting. So I just want to recognize Maya and all our efforts of making those significant updates in this interim update of the CCMP.
Great job covering it all.
It'll be shorter for the policy.
Are there any additional questions? Can we think?
So I noticed throughout you have either agency management or the resiliency coalition. So I think to streamline it, you could just change it to the TPRPC, and that will reflect all of our different committees and everything we're doing programmatically.
I can do that.
Comments or questions?
Question online from Felicia. What is
Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, good morning. Hey, Maya, great presentation, very informative. I love the approach and how the Estuary program is to update the information and make it current. My question is, well, actually, I have another question too. I know that the CCMP is also online. Are we going to also update there and make it more interactive so that consumers or visitors can click on those particular action items and actually view the updates there also? And my second question is, when is the expected time you think that you would submit this to E EPA?
If there are no major changes provided by the management or policy boards, I expect that I could submit this to EPA like by mid-December at the latest for your review. And then, yes, to your first question, we intend basically to create like a section on our website that is encapsulating all of the updated information. It will be clickable, it'll be searchable. You can navigate the full scope of the CCFP tiny bite sizes so that you're not as overwhelmed. And it'll be much like the State of the Bay portion of our website that's incorporating direct data feeds from our GitHub repositories. So it'll be updating some of the supporting graphics and data visualization as we push the updates with new data on our GitHub. So yes, we'll be moving towards something that is publicly accessible, clickable on our website. We're just waiting to do that until we have EPA approval.
One more question I just thought about, Maya. For those items that are complete, are you planning to just delete it out and make a statement that this was completed and what the deliverable was? Or just leave it in, or how are you going to handle those?
For those that are listed as complete, we intend to leave them in the plan listed as complete so that we're reflecting that progress. We won't consider deleting those items until we get to the major update that is planned for 2027. So that full 10-year planning horizon, we don't want to sort of like lose the record of the progress that's been made over this time. There are several actions that we are recommending deleting and or merging, and those we're recommending deleting, but just because that is completed, that does not mean we're going to delete it this time.
Thank you, Maya. Great job.
Overhaul or the change to the presentation on the web, that sounds like it would take a while. I mean, like, what would be the ideal full timeline for having an updated CCMP out there?
Do you want the ed timeline or do you want staff? We're hoping to bring some semblance of the online version back to the February board meeting, but it might not be complete.
That's
fully complete by then.
The contract with Schaefer is going to go through April, and so I think the more realistic option, which is still very aggressive, will be to the May meeting. So we'll see. Sometime in the early half of the year.
Is the EPA review likely to take a while or no?
Alicia's probably the best to answer that. I think part of it we followed all of their basically they have a checklist that they review, and I think we followed all of that guidance. So we made it very easy for Alicia and Nancy to review. If they concur that these are minor updates and not major revisions, then I think it'll go pretty quickly. Alicia, do you have any comments about the potential timeline?
No, it's just no way to tell. We have to go through a number of processes in different places to do the review. Nancy and I usually work very efficiently in getting our review done, but actually to get the concurrence from higher up, sometimes that takes a little longer, and we can't necessarily give you a time frame for that. But I don't think we are adding any new actions. I just heard us updating and pretty much merging or deleting in concept, but not actually taking out. So it doesn't sound like there's major actions to look at for updates or new actions, I should say. So it's a minor update. It's a lot shorter in time frame than a major update, but still there again, it's just no way to tell. And if you submit it during the holidays, not sure who's available to keep that moving forward, but we will do our best.
Understood. I think the good news is that we can move forward with some of the web-based architecture, and then it's a matter of just plugging and chugging approved language into that format once it's there.
Any additional questions? the recommended action is that we approve the text changes to the CCMP, or we recommend to the policy board to approve the text changes to the CCMP goals, actions, and activities. Is
So moved.
there a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? Those in favor? Any objections? Motion passes. The next item is the 2024 Bay Mini Grants Project. Jessica.
Hello, good morning. Does anybody need to take a stretch after that? Maybe a round of applause for Maya. All right.
But we didn't have to do it every meeting for 2 years.
So the Bay Mini Grant Program, Sheila has been managing this program for a couple of years, and we're transitioning that program over to me slowly but surely. So feel free to quiz me on this. It'll help me feel a little pressured under it. So quick reminder, mini grants are small grants up to $5,000 provided to the community, whether that be nonprofits, businesses, governments, schools, or universities, for just about any kind of environmental restoration or environmental education project, with a big focus on community engagement and community education. So the mini grant program is supported by revenue from the Tampa Bay Estuary Specialty License Plate, also known as the Tarpon Tag, and they have to be completed in a calendar year. So this year, about $100,000 was made available for the Bay Mini Grant RFP. We advertised the mini grants in a plethora of publications, both print and digital, and I think that really worked out because we had 44 applications come in this year, which is the highest we've had in the last several years. And the requested amount totaled over $200,000. So we had to pare that down by about half for the available funding. A subset of the Community Advisory Committee members met to review the applications and pared it down to the list you see before you of 23 projects totaling $98,542. They provided those findings to staff, our executive director, who is making the recommendations in front of you today. So you can see there are a lot of great projects recommended for funding for next year. Note that the ones that are not recommended does not mean that they are bad projects by any means, but we did have to cut it down a good bit for the available funding. And maybe some aspect of those projects could be improved, whether it's a clearer scope of work, a more detailed budget, whatever it is, more partners. So our intent is to reach out to each of those that did not receive an award this year and provide them detailed feedback and potentially help them make an even better application for next year. So the action before you is to recommend these projects to the policy board for approval. There is one recommended for approval from Pinellas County. I'm not sure if Pinellas has to abstain or not. But I will take any questions about the mini grant program, about those recommended projects, or anything related if you have them.
So that's a no, Pinellas County doesn't need to. Any questions for Jessica?
One question, just one question.
Next you want to have.
How about that? They're all great, Viviana. I do think there are some really unique projects, especially with partnerships. We did have some new applicants this year, so I'm excited to see, it's great to have the partners that apply every year and have great projects every year, but it's even better, in my opinion, to have people that have just learned about it and are really excited. We got a phone call after somebody saw an ad in a paper saying, I just saw your ad in the paper. I'm really excited to apply for this. That individual didn't get awarded this year, but they are probably going to try again next year. So it just goes to show that I think this is a really great community engagement piece of our work.
And a follow-up, how is it advertised? Is it in the paper?
This year, we advertised in 7 different publications, both printed and digital, throughout the watershed, trying to get coverage over the whole watershed. I've got a list of those publications that I can give to you if you're interested in them. Yep.
How do the awards work? Are they kind of a check? Is it cost reimbursable?
Reimbursed, so yeah, and there is an option for those that may not have the upfront funds. We are able to be flexible with them, but for the most part, it is a reimbursable grant. So they expend the funds, they provide the deliverables, and then request reimbursement.
Usually issuing a purchase order with a simple scope of work based on their proposal. Initiate the loop.
Any questions for Jessica? No? Okay. The recommended action is that we recommend the policy board approve funding of the Bay Mini grants based on the findings of the Community Act Advisory Committee and Executive Director recommendations. Motion?
So moved.
Second? Any additional discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any objections? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the remaining basis 7 proceedings publishing costs. Marcus.
Yeah, so this is probably the simplest and easiest action on the agenda this morning. If y'all remember, we published the proceedings for Basis 7 back in August, and that was done through a contract with the Florida Academy of Sciences, and we published that in a special issue of Florida Scientist. That contract, an initial PO, was not to exceed $25,000, and that was using FY21 work plan dollars. And based on a couple issues, there was a change in the publisher, as well as publication of additional text in that proceedings that we hadn't anticipated. We actually exceeded that $25,000 in that initial PO by about almost $5,000. So this action item is basically to request that the management board authorize Ed to enter into a new PO with Florida Academy of Sciences to cover those additional costs of about $5,000. We have unencumbered resources to do that, so it's not an issue of taking funds from somewhere else. It's just a matter of entering into a new PO to cover those costs. So that's the background.
Any questions for Marcus? It's pretty straightforward. Okay, it's an action item. The recommended action is that we recommend the policy board authorize the executive director to approve the new purchase order for the remaining costs of the basis proceedings publications. Have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. A second? A second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any objections? Motion passes. Okay. Now we are at the agenda item that has changed. This is on the old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment Contractor Selection.
Yeah, kind of walk you through how we arrived at this recommendation that we're presenting you to today. As you might recall, at our August board meeting, we investigated whether or not to move forward with a contract that was advertised through a request for proposal on this project that was initiated in June. At the August board meeting, it was decided that we would re-advertise this work. This work is related to some of the major CCMP action updates related to our reasonable assurance plan, as well as work that we're interested in conducting in Old Tampa Bay to investigate whether or not a new nutrient diet is needed for this bay segment. We recognize some of the poor water quality conditions as well as seagrass losses that have been represented in that bay segment, and that new initiatives are going to needed to address those moving forward. So this work was to build on some of the foundational information that was developed for the program over this past 30-year period, as well as explore new opportunities to get that bay segment back on track. And that was the full scope of what we put out on the streets beginning of September. We actually got a better response during the second advertisement. We got 4 proposals back during that second advertisement period based on that need for work. And those respondents are listed there in the updated packet. The range costs from about $315,000 upwards to $319,000, just below what we advertised as the available funds for this work. Through the course of that RFP advertisement, we've had 7 criteria that we were using through the review committee to judge these respondents' proposals. 4 of those were scored by the review committee itself. The review committee was encompassed one of our staff, as well as representatives from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and the 2 Nitrogen Management Consortium co-chairs. Based on the review criteria that were identified in the RFP, the review panel provided scores for 4 of those criteria. Those 4 were team qualifications, project approach, level of effort and cost by task, and past performance considerations. 3 criteria were scored by the estuary program, and they relate to the nature of the respondents' proposal, whether or not they were identified as a minority, women, or disadvantaged business enterprise and had an affirmative action plan. With 1 criteria, the other criteria was related to whether or not they've been awarded work from the estuary program over the past 3 years. And the last criteria scored by the program was related to the total cost that each respondent came in as. And there was a scale amongst that last criteria, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the tail end. So we held this review committee meeting last Friday with the 5 members. I facilitated that meeting, and I listened to the conversation to get the full breadth and totality of what the review committee recommendations were going to be to me as the executive director. Going down to the bottom, you can see in that table, we highlight sort of the outcomes of 2 rounds of scoring. There was an initial preliminary scores that the review panels and committee provided to us prior to the start of the meeting. We had a very candid conversation about each one of the proposals, and then we gave the opportunity of each of the reviewers to adjust their scores based on the conversation that was had by the full membership of the review committee. These final scores are basically the outcomes of that second round of scoring that I'm going to highlight here. So that first column basically relates to those 4 technical criteria that the review panels independently scored and revised based on the review panel discussion last Friday. And there was one firm that basically scored through 4 of the 5 reviewers as the top ranked respondent based on the technical approach that they identified in their proposals. There's a closely scoring second firm, Geosyntec, that was uniformly scored as the second place respondent under those technical merit scores. So that kind of identifies that first column and how the scores played out, and the 4th column is the ranks based on that technical merit score. As I mentioned, there's 3 additional criteria that were advertised in the RFP that identified 3 scores that were assigned by the program. The separation between the 2 top ranked respondents are identified in the table on the first 2 rows, basically a score of 8 versus a score of 12. That was largely driven by that last criteria of the spread of total cost that each of the respondents provided in response to this RFP. And that difference was amount of about $4,000. So when you take the totality of all the scores into account, the total score for the actually second or place ranked respondent in terms of the technical approach, they actually came out on top, and it was based on that $4,000 difference. So we had some additional conversation as the review committee based on the outcomes of the total scores that were considered. It was, I think, the unanimous sort of perspective of the review committee that minor difference in total cost for the project should not be overly weighted in making a decision on moving forward on the project. Kind of weighed that in terms of what we advertised in terms of the 7 scoring criteria, as an executive director, have always fallen back on the science and technical approach that is espoused to us, and these are proposals of what they are anticipating to do. And I agreed with the review committee outcomes that the higher scoring technical merit score garnered from the review panel is the basis of what I'm providing as my recommendation to the boards today. And that firm was Stantec. Again, they presented some novelty in the technical approach. We know that we're facing an uphill battle to get Old Tampa Bay on track. And their approach introduced the concept of hysteresis, which is sort of an estuarine ecology theory that's been in the literature for a little bit now. And it's basically describing sort of the path of degradation. So, the work that we need to do to get some of these systems back on track is not going to be a mirror image of what caused the degradation in the first place. And we've kind of been talking about that for Old Tampa Bay for quite some time, that nutrients are key to getting Old Tampa Bay back on track, but there are these other management interventions that are likely going to be needed to fully see seagrass coverage as we did back in 2016. So sort of that novel approach was, I think, what set the top technical merit scoring firm apart from the others. Have full faith in the other closely scoring firm, Geosyntec, that they could perform this work, and that's reflected in my overall recommendation. That if we can't come to terms with an agreement and a full scope of work with Stantec, I have the same amount of comfort of trying to negotiate a scope of work and agreement with the second place technical scoring respondent, Geosyntec. But as it stands right now, based on the totality of the conversations we had with the review committee and sort of the differences in the technical approach espoused in each of the response proposals, those two very closely ranked respondents, that was the separator for me, and that's why I'm bringing that recommendation to the boards to move forward with and try to negotiate a scope of work and agreement with Stantec Consulting Services. I'd be happy to stop there and answer any questions you might have. Don's also here to answer any questions you might have in terms of the process of coming up to that coming to the board with that recommendation. But I'll stop there and answer any questions that you might have.
Could I offer a comment or two? Yeah. I did discuss this with Ed several times. We worked through the recommendation and the scoring process. I've reviewed the RFP. I'm very comfortable with the recommendation that Ed is making to the management board. The RFP makes it clear that there will be 4 technical criteria, 3 non-technical, that the evaluation will be based, and we'll look at all 7 criteria. But the RFP does not provide that the award would be to the overall highest ranked firm. It's something that this board and Ed as the executive director should take into account as to whether or not he weighs the technical and you weigh the technical criteria as being overwhelmingly important versus the one criteria, the one non-technical criteria that seems to have skewed this was the cost proposal. And as we all know, RFPs are not based on cost alone, certainly a factor to consider. And Ed has considered that, but he has made a recommendation based on the technical criteria, which I do not see to be in conflict in any way. In fact, it's very consistent with the RFP. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So, Don, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's where I was heading to as well. Actually, on page 5 of the RFP, the evaluation process that it outlines that we may consider scores in the final rankings, but it's not the final decision-making process. I also want to outline that and clarify there was cost involved in the submission process, correct?
Yes.
It's not a straight CCNA. because CCNE is separate from cost selection. So I feel comfortable because at this point, the decision and the recommendation is also up to Ed to provide to the management board. So I agree with that.
I know we have one of the respondents here and would like to make any comments to the board that deem appropriate.
Yeah, I'd like the opportunity to speak.
You're welcome.
My name is Scott Ditchy. I'm a senior principal with GeoSyntech. I'm the project director on the GeoSyntech team. So back over the summer when this was initially advertised, GeoSyntech put together a really comprehensive team of people with a lot of institutional knowledge of Old Tampa Bay and some new ideas. We spent a lot of time, effort, and money on putting together a full proposal. As you recall, after discussions internally with the policy board, it was deemed that they would revise the proposal, put this back on the street for re-advertising. I do want to point out that after we submitted our initial proposal, that was now public record. So all of the people that responded to this re-advertisement had the opportunity to review our approach, our team, put us at a little bit of a competitive disadvantage. Still, additional time, money, and effort putting together a second proposal. And, well, we came in number one. They can parse it how they want, but we were the highest ranked team. We were the highest ranked team through all three iterations. Now, the way this is put here is that there were substantial differences in the technical approach. But when you look at the scores, it's less than 2 points that separates us, less than 2 points. Even though we were number one, after the scores were accepted on Friday, then we were informed earlier this week that the scoring criteria was going to change, and now they were solely looking at technical. Needless to say, this was a bit of a bitter pill for us to swallow. We had been ranked number one through 3 iterations of the scoring criteria, as well as, well, maybe fourth if you take the first time. So you're being asked now to move forward with recommending it to the second place team and submit overall total scores. And, you know, I would argue that that's not standard procurement procedure. I would argue that that potentially has a negative impact on future respondents that want to respond to the estuary program. But GeoSyntech, or yeah, we have a thought. We have something we'd like to recommend and throw out. If you look at the scores, the technical scores were extremely close. So were the final scores. In listening to the selection committee meeting, we feel that there was some lack of understanding of our approach, lack of understanding of what we were trying to accomplish. So we would like to recommend that GeoSyntech and the second place team go to presentations. We feel that this would allow us to fully explain our approach. This would allow the selection committee to ask questions of us. This would give you all comfort in knowing that you really selected the team that really knocked it out of the park. Because a less than 2% difference on technical scores is hardly an overwhelming consensus by any stretch of the imagination. So GeoSyntech would like to ask the management board to consider a motion to table the recommendation to go and be awarded to the second place team, but rather to have further oral interview and presentations between the two teams to clarify the difference and come to a final recommendation. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate
Do you have Kelly's raised her hand online?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I want to thank everyone and especially the committee that spent a lot of time reviewing all these presentations. And I spent a significant amount of time discussing the process with Maya and Ed during a briefing with our commissioner. And I have concerns with how the process was handled, how it occurred. And this is exactly what I told Ed and Maya, so there's no change to my opinion. I went back and even reviewed our processes and procedures at the county, and I just see some issues that concern me with potential for protest. If not this time, a future time, if we don't address this. In conversations with Maya and Ed, a criterion was used that was not in the RFP. That just can't happen. Multiple votes were taken during the process. That is, while, you know, during a procurement process like that, there are initial scoring made by the participants in the process, and sometimes they will adjust slightly if they're way off the mark. But taking multiple votes over and over seems to create an opportunity for undue influence if someone wants a score a certain way, and I'm not comfortable with that. My recommendation to Ed and Maya was to bring number 1 and number 2 back in for presentations. I understand that the committee did not want to do that. They said they felt that that the number 1 ranked firm on the technical basis was stronger, but the points do not reflect that. It's less than 2-point difference. So, you know, clearly it's not overwhelming. And I think in order to, in my mind, in my opinion, just one person, to ensure the integrity of the process is that we bring number 1 and number 2 in for presentations and have them scored based on that process. It is reflected in the RFP, and while I respect Ed's recommendation, this is not about any individual firm for me. It's about the process and how things went about. Thank you.
I just want to clarify one thing. I think Kelly has made important points to our procurement process that we could take a look at, ways that we can modify those policies beforehand. But for this particular review, while our evaluation process does allow for multiple iterations of voting, there was a preliminary score and a final score, and that is what was conducted in the review meeting for this request for proposals.
Did she say, I thought I heard her say there was a criterion used that was not in the RFP?
I think the criterion that she's referring to is not really a criterion, but it was the overall rank or funding recommendation, which is basically a distillation or correspondence to all of those technical merit scores that each reviewer provided. I think that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, and just to clarify, what's in this table today is the scores and the ranks based on the scores of the criteria identified in the RFP. The funding recommendation heuristic that was discussed during the meeting is not in any way bearing on the recommendation.
So let me ask a question, just because I didn't have the opportunity of a full briefing. But I'm hearing a little bit more. So Don, is the agreement, does that require professional liability insurance on this agreement?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Does this agreement require professional liability?
Does the agreement
require professional
liability? You're talking about the contract?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to have to defer to Ed on that as to whether or not this contractor will be placed under a contract that requires professional liability.
That wasn't part of any of the RFP requirements.
But it certainly is a good insurance provision to have. You know, that would be something that we'd have to negotiate with the winning team, whoever that team is.
So there was a first vote and then a second vote at the same meeting.
So we've asked the review panel to provide their preliminary scores prior to entering the committee meeting last Friday. We had a discussion based on those preliminary scores, and then there was an opportunity for the review panel to reconsider their scoring based on the conversation of the review committee that became the final scores. And that happened after the meeting. We wanted to verify that we captured as staff, the final scores from that second round of scoring that happened at the review panel.
I read a section from the RFP that I think bears on this directly. It says the committee may perform as many rounds of preliminary findings as the committee deems necessary to provide final findings to the executive director. The committee has the option to request presentations from any or all of the respondents. So in terms of the issue of there were multiple rounds of scoring, I think the RFP makes it clear that there could be multiple rounds. And the RFP also indicated that there could be presentations if the committee felt it necessary. Now, of course, if this group feels that it's necessary, that would be appropriate as well for you to ask that. You certainly could do that. But I just want to make clear that, in my opinion, there was nothing, there was no misapplication of the RFP by them going ahead and having a couple of rounds of scoring.
So was this RFP prepared along the lines of professional services or just services to be performed? Was it the intent of this RFP, was it for professional services or services to be performed? The intent of how it was structured.
They're technical services that they're providing to the estuary program to address 4 tasks that we outlined in the RFP.
Can I ask Kelly a question? I'm thinking it's kind of just trying to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Brajesh.
From here, I'm feeling like this is hinging between trying to balance between CCNA and a contractor selection. It's not.
I mean, I'll be honest, I am a little confused as to Dawn's recommendation. And again, in my briefing, I was initially advised that the attorney for the estuary program had concerns that there could be a protest. So now I'm hearing there aren't concerns. So I'm a little confused there. I don't know what has changed in the last 48 hours, but maybe something has. I'm just going based on, I did not have time to go back and listen to the recording. I had wanted to do that. But the way Maya and Ed relayed the process to me, and I asked specifically what Mr. Khan's recommendation was and that he had concerns himself. I had relayed my concerns to them about this process. It's non-standard, whether it's CCNA or just a request for services. It was just not standard. And I understand that the RFP is for, the scoring criteria are in there, but you can't pick one scoring criteria and use that as the basis for award. There are scoring criteria and they add up to total points. I feel that the top two firms are so close that presentations are warranted. I realize that would delay the process maybe a quarter. And I understand it's already delayed given the second RFP. It's just given my briefing and the conversations we had, it led me to have a great deal of pause.
Could I respond?
Yes.
Kelly, I don't know what was said in your briefing. Certainly I was not present. But I want to tell you exactly what my position has been on this from the get-go. When Ed initially called me about this, I indicated I wanted to see the RFP. I reviewed the RFP and then I reviewed a proposed agenda item that Ed had worked up. And we discussed it. And I said to Ed, I think you need to explain a little bit more in the agenda item why you're recommending the firm that you're recommending, and explain a little bit more about the technical, the importance of the technical criteria. I went on to say, however, as I always do in a procurement, I cannot assure you that there won't be a protest. I always indicate to an agency that they need to be aware that if there's an issue that comes up, you could face a protest. In no way did I ever indicate to Ed that I had a problem with his recommendation or that I thought there would be a protest. But I indicated to him that if there is a protest, I feel that the explanation that he's given is reasonable and can be defended. And that was my statement. I don't know what was said in the briefing, but that was my statement, consistent with my position from the beginning of this issue.
And I just would like to further clarify, I think, based on John's counsel, I hope it came through in any three of the respondents selected have the right to protest the decision, not just the second place respondent. So again, reading that, laying out the process of how to make the recommendation, I want to make sure everyone on the board, protest could happen. It could happen in the RFP advertised though.
Let me speak for it, just because I have an opinion too, just that in terms of what was after, this doesn't read to me like an invitation to bid, right? My experience is on the state side and how we do different things. But having used review committees and sat on them for different calls for proposals, admittedly primarily research-based, the evaluations that are conducted, they provide information to the party that actually is empowered to make those decisions. That it is not the sole determining factor. And in many cases, it doesn't fall out that the parties that are selected are in order of rank for a number of reasons. So that's just like a tool that I've used or helped with before. And it doesn't say that that's how decisions will be made. That's just how proposals are evaluated, which is, an important part, but not the sole determining. It's not a straight up bid for services. This is a request for proposals where, approach matters and it's not completely black and white as to how decisions are made. So I feel like we're talking about why the number didn't determine the selection. And in my experience, like that's just an assistive process, but it's not the determining process. Or the review committees that I've sat on that have evaluated proposals, or when I use them to make determinations about how to spend state money. So, David.
So if there were to be a protest, what is that process that would have to go through work?
Okay. If there's a protest that was filed, then the bidding, the award stops. You don't proceed with the award. The protest is sent to the Division of Administrative Hearings, who assigns an administrative law judge. A formal hearing is held. Both sides get to introduce evidence as to why they feel their position is correct. The administrative law judge makes a decision, and that decision then comes back to the to the policy board for a final decision. That whole process, if it's expedited, you might get a recommendation back to the February board meeting. More than likely, it would be the April board meeting. So that's the standard process for a protest.
So I'm gonna throw it out there because I'm agreeing with Kelly on this. So while yes, the RFP says that the sole discretion is there, but I think hearing more about how the process went, I have questions now. So if it's said by the technical and they will not interview, I think the two of them should come in to clarify interviews, and that will relieve us of the risk of that possible protest. I mean, regardless, I think it's already delayed. I agree. I think just hinting so much in between of the qualifications, and if there are questions. I mean, I saw numerous CCNA selection processes, and I will tell you, questions, a lot of clarification comes out of the interviews.
If the panel declined that and this board recommends that that happen anyway, I mean, is it the panel that gets that has the presentations and asks the questions? If they didn't want to do it, like.
You have to, I think, get the review committee to hear those presentations.
You would want the review committee to hear the presentations and then make a further recommendation to the management board. Obviously, that would be, in the, probably in the February board meeting.
I mean, we work with the review committee over the interim to try to schedule that.
I believe a key element here is, just like Kelly mentioned it, where the evaluation criteria that was stipulated in the RFP, were those the ones used to evaluate and to come to this? That's a key element. So I'm hearing from Kelly that she's not comfortable about the criteria used. So again, is it clear or not that the criteria was used for the evaluation?
There were no criteria beyond what was advertised in the RFP that were used.
However, Kelly's mentioning that she's not comfortable with the way the criteria was applied.
That's when you read through the RFP, it says that there's, I think it was 1 through 4 for the evaluation committee and 5 through 7 from the ESHRE board staff. So, coming out to the interviews, I mean, I think my recommendation, if we're really looking supposedly at the most technical, do the interviews based on category 1 through 4.
And I think that's a good point, is that it's a technical aspect. And so if you're just looking at the technical rank, then there is, the ESHRE program is making a recommendation based off of that. So now when you add in cost, that is a consideration and has been weighted. And so does that come into play? And I think hearing the ESHRE program's recommendation is in line with their legal counsel. And kind of to Leanne's point as well, is the taking a preliminary ranking, having the discussion with the committee, and then taking a final ranking is not uncommon. The district is going through procurement services for our general engineering services, or GES, and that's exactly the process that we've done. So it is not uncommon to take multiple kind of iterations of that, and the RFP clearly outlines that that is allowable. So I think it does sound reasonable, the approach of taking the technical aspects and saying this is the agents, this is just the consulting firm that ranked the highest, is cost consideration. Should that be, and the ESHRE program is saying that the technical aspects are, we've taken into consideration the review committee input, but we're making a recommendation based off of the needs of the ESHRE program, the needs of Old Tampa Bay, and that is the priority. So I'm comfortable with the legal counsel saying, we've reviewed this, the RFP states that yes, there's criteria that may be taken into consideration and has been, and here's the recommendation that we're making. So,
but is that clearly stipulated in the RFP that they can do the technical side only?
The legal counsel is saying yes.
Oh, I'm asking the RFP. Does the RFP actually stipulate?
I'm sorry, please repeat the question.
The RFP does the RFP say that you can put more weight on certain criteria? Like,
No, what the RFP says, that the 7 criteria will be considered. It doesn't say that they will be weighted. It says they will be considered.
So what the RFP says is the management board will consider the recommendations and final rankings of the executive director in making its recommendations to policy.
so So we can either vote on whether or not to approve Ed's recommendation, or we can table that and go, recommend that they go to presentation and Q&A. So how to get their temperature on that?
Yeah, the only thing to consider is timing, basically initiating the contract versus delaying a little bit to the next management policy board meetings. I think we can make the time to have presentations, reconvene the review committee, and then come back with a formal recommendation based on those presentations. I don't have any problem with that. The only thing I mentioned is the timing. It's just going to delay it even further. I would remind the management policy board that we went out to bid originally in June. We didn't decide on a firm at the August meeting. We're not deciding on a firm at this meeting. So it's just delaying the work that we needs to get done in Old Tampa Bay.
One more question, and maybe this is for Tom, but if the committee does make a recommendation to the review committee to hold the presentations, does that impact helpful or hurtful if it goes into a protest?
Well, yes, I think if it goes into a protest, it shows that this group and ultimately the policy board has gone the extra mile to hear from both parties again. So yes, I think it would be viewed positively. But of course, going and having those presentations doesn't guarantee anybody that you won't have a protest, but it would be an indication of good faith and of going the extra mile to be reasonable.
Would it be fair as part of the interviews, the letters of invitation to both these firms in inviting them for the interviews to clearly outline that the final deliberation and ranking will be based on the technical, and just clearly outline when the invitation goes out? Do you think that would be fair?
I think it would be fair if that is in fact the intention.
So, yeah, after listening to everything, and yeah, I wasn't able to be in the briefing this week as well. I've sat on also many committees for procurement for professional services. Those were all under the CCNA, which is, I realize, a little bit different from the process that this RFP went out under. And, but it does seem odd to me the way the scoring came out and then the way the recommendation has been, So what I'm used to, again, under CCNA is we're just looking at the qualifications of the firms. The cost isn't considered until a contract is negotiated with the chosen firm. So I don't know. I think I would lean towards having the presentation from the two top ranked firms and really honing in on the technical qualifications in the proposals for the work to be done.
That's honestly why I was asking the question on the professional service, professional liability requirement, because that goes back to if it is a professional liability requirement, professional services, then that should have been done through CCN. So I just think just to clean up the process, we need to do this with the two interviews.
Question, since the timeliness is an important issue here, is there a way for the management board to make a decision for the February meeting? Is there a mechanism for that?
Say that again, sorry.
Is there a mechanism for the management board to make a decision outside of before the February meeting?
We could hold a special meeting. We have
to advertise a special meeting. But is your question, would the management board be able to consider this at the February meeting, or are you asking about an earlier meeting in February?
An earlier meeting to help mitigate the timeliness.
I think that would depend on when the presentations could be made, when the selection committee could be assembled to do the ranking and hear the presentations. I mean, if that can't be until after the holidays, then it really doesn't make any sense to try to have an earlier meeting than February. I think a lot of it depends on when, if you're going to recommend presentations, when those would be held. And then you can address whether you need an earlier meeting.
So do we have a motion? No. I kind of sense, there's not full agreement in the room. So
I have an additional question. Is there an issue with inviting just the top 2 ranked firms to present, or do we need to look at potentially open it to all respondents to the presentation? Or is that something to another discussion?
The RFP says the committee has the option to request presentations from any or all respondents. So you could limit it to the 2.
And because cost was included in the submission, I'm not thinking this is CCNA. CCNA would have said minimum 3. I would say going with the top 2 is fair.
So I will make a motion that the committee requests the review panel invite the top 2 candidates, or top 2 technical ranked, overall ranked respondents back for a presentation.
Would there be, sorry, go ahead. Is there any clarification to Burgess' point that they would evaluate just strictly on the technical approaches? Or the full scope of the 7 criteria?
I think it would fall in line with the RFP is that they would consider the criteria as is in the current RFP.
Yeah, but it's 1 through 5. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just saying that when you follow the RFP, whatever the RFP criteria has in there should be considered for the presentations.
They should consider all.
All of it, yeah.
I don't think I'm recommending a change to that RFP.
So we have a motion to request the top 2 respondents to present and answer questions to the evaluation committee to be reconsidered on, or additionally considered across all the criteria listed in the RFP. Second?
Second that.
Second. Any additional discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any objections? That motion passed.
All right. Y'all appreciate the candid conversation. I think we'll move on with that guidance.
We're at the executive director and staff reports.
Back to the agenda. So thank you for that. Appreciate, like I said, the conversation that has had. This is a healthy, robust conversation based on outcomes of a review panel. I feel totally confident that we'll arrive at a recommendation after the presentations that the boards are going to accept. So my director reports, just wanted to welcome Jill Kanish to our program. She started as our accounting specialist at the beginning of November. She's going to be helping out mainly with our week-to-week accounts payable, as well as starting to help out with our audit this year as well with the support of Jessica Lewis. So please help me welcome Jill to the program. Also wanted to mention that
Happy that you're not from FWC.
it's also Jill's birthday too. Happy birthday, Jill. I also want to mention, I think I talked about this at prior board meetings, is that the estuary program has undergo a 5-year program evaluation through EPA. We submitted a package back in April. We provided a site visit to the review committee from both EPA headquarters of Region 4, as well as a director from the Tillamook Estuaries program to sort of highlight some of the work that we've done over the 2017 to 2022 period. We actually got glowing results back and had the affirmation that we're proficient in implementing our CCMP. We received that letter on September 18th, and it's linked there in your packet. The last item I just wanted to mention is that based on both what was approved at the May board meeting and amended at the August board meeting, we submitted the 3rd year of bill funding proposal to EPA. Included 4 projects, primarily related to tidal tributary restoration or shoreline restoration throughout the watershed. Those projects are listed in the executive director reports there. And we're looking forward to getting those under contract as soon as we get approval on agreement from EPA here shortly. Last but not least, I wanted to kind of give Jessica an opportunity to explain what our TBRF priorities are for the upcoming solicitation, and as well as something else for the board to consider for use of our specialty license plate fund. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello again. Y'all mostly know, but just a reminder for anyone, TBRF, Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, is a grant program that we administer with Restore America's Estuaries, which is a 501c3. It brings multiple sources of funding together to fund habitat restoration, water quality improvement, or applied research projects. We choose priorities each year to try to steer the work and the applications, and also to sort of give people ideas of what kind of projects we would love to see submitted to the TBRF program. And sometimes there are emerging issues or issues that we're not seeing as much progress on as people like. This year, the proposed priorities before you are developed to address some habitats that either aren't making as much progress in terms of restoration as is needed to hit the 2030 targets for the Habitat Master Plan, or they were chosen to take advantage of potentially other funding that's anticipated in the near future. Also, nutrient load reduction, green infrastructure, and septic conversion continues to be top priorities for water quality improvement, as is science literacy throughout the watershed. So this is not an action item, but if you have any feedback on these proposed priorities, or if you have questions about TBRF or these priorities, I'd be happy to hear your input or answer any questions that you might have on this. This one's for Jessica. Great. Another thing I wanted to bring up is the use of the specialty license plate revenue. So currently, the revenue from the Tarpon Tag funds the Bay Mini Grant program. And I'd like your input on potentially expanding the use of that revenue to additional programming that we might pursue. So possibilities could be using the funds toward urban or suburban backyard habitat creation, for example, potentially on private properties, or reduction of nutrient loading from stormwater runoff. But I'm not sure exactly what this program could look like, but I think there are a lot of options that we could look at. So I'm interested in getting your input as our management board on your openness to using Tarpon Tag revenue for additional purposes to support implementation of the CCMP still, as of course, even if those properties may be not in the public realm or may not have a conservation easement. So taking advantage of private property for habitat enhancement, for example, may be something that we're interested in doing. So, Ed, did you want to add or clarify anything?
Yeah, just additional context within state statute, the use of those funds are directed towards implementation of our CCMP and any staff support for that purpose, as well as there's a portion of the funds that go to the regional planning council to help out with the implementation of the CCMP as well. So we would, get Don's read on whatever the ultimate alternative use is decided by this board for the use of those specialty license plate funds. But there is, I think, some discretion of how we could direct them. It was just the board's policy to utilize those specialty license plate funds primarily for paid mini grants in the past, and we're just asking if we should consider revising that for additional uses towards implementation of our CCMP. And one of the things we're considering is sort of these additional grants that could potentially go to private homeowners. And if that's not something that the board wants to consider, we would like to hear that.
That doesn't detract from the mini grants? Is there an excess?
Yeah, there's excess funds. So we always get a lot of proposals, especially this year. And we always try to be conservative in what we're funding based on the CEC recommendations. So there's always a leftover amount of funding that we're garnering from the specialty license plate sales that has been building up.
Well, if you're talking about directing it to improvements on private properties, I guess, there would have to be clear criteria on.
Yes, we tried to work through that and what that means.
We're asking you to vote on this right now. Take a temperature check of, is stuff beyond mini grants? Are you open to that? And if so, is private property a concern? And if it is, we won't even go down that path. Or if you're okay with it, if there are clear guardrails that, we would develop those before we made any kind of decision. This is kind of like just a temperature check right now.
So, yeah, I'd be very open to using the funds for something other than the mini grant program, as long as there's, available funds. And with regard to things that might be done on private properties, as you were just, getting into, I think there would need to be some very clear criteria as to how that would be considered. I know with the county, we're very careful about doing things for the sole benefit of a private property owner, as opposed to,
I'm sure that would be considered. Yeah, the private lands can be really important, and how people manage them and what they do in them. But yeah, I think that's how I feel. Like, I just want to make sure it's clearly for the greater good and not just for the benefit of the landowner. I'm thinking homeowner, but it's probably landowner is more like what we're talking about.
I think what Jessica had in mind is things like the flip program, to make a backyard or a front yard with Florida native or Florida friendly plants. So rather, it's like removing some of that non-native turf grass and those kinds of things. So that I think could happen on, a 10th of an acre.
That's true.
I need that. But yeah, I think as long as the criteria is very robust and clear as to the benefit for the bay.
Could you also use it for something like the septic to sewer conversions? So like for the homeowners part of that, because I know that's a big hang up for people. You're talking about maybe $7,000 of their own money to hook into a sewer system. Would that be something that might?
I don't think there's any state statute that include the use of it in that way.
We're going to have to look into it. I don't want to give you an opinion here today without looking into it.
I think that could be beneficial. And I think like Gulfport has done something like that, really work with a certain number of, it's kind of first come, first serve. And they give them like a rebate or something like that once they're connected to a sewer to defray those costs.
I think more broadly, using the funds would be great. I'm not sure, like somebody's private garden and what that looks like would be where I would put the money. Maybe like a school going on Florida native, something like that could educate people or be more of a tool. But
So what I'm hearing is an openness to using TARPA revenue for things beyond mini grants, but a need for additional clarity in terms of what we might be proposing. So we would need to come back with something more fully fleshed out.
Yeah, one example I guess I'm thinking of in terms of, so a lot of properties that would have a direct benefit to, that they are going to be adjacent to some water body, you know, whether it's a tributary or the bay itself, on average tends to be fairly affluent. And so, you know, I think could be a perception of helping already affluent people improve their properties. And so I think we would want to be, you know, cognizant of that and try to avoid that kind of perception.
Heard.
Yeah, I think we're waiting all this discussion and we'll come back with a more formal recommendation if we go this route for additional use of the Bay Mini Grant funds, or sorry, especially license plate funds.
We've seen, I mean, there was additional requests under TBER. What about providing some additional projects funding through, you know, or redirecting TBER to some of this available funds?
We usually tap out TBER each year with the available funds. So we do have surplus of specialty license plate funds that we're looking.
That's what she's saying. You apply to the TBER.
Yeah, that's an option that we consider as well.
And I'm in agreement about the private property. I mean, the district doesn't do any projects on that. I think there's additional concern that as the property, an individual property owner, if that property owner sells, then the next person that comes in, are they gonna, let's say you change it to Florida friendly, are they gonna tear it out and put back in, you know, what you just paid to take out? There's no protection over that. But maybe there might be some consideration for a community source, kind of like a school. I was thinking, you know, community area. That might be some better, still private property, but maybe there's a community benefit for those funds.
Yeah, and right now I think that type of project would already qualify for either the Bay Mini Grant or TBER funds.
So you're trying to fill a niche that doesn't have a opportunity to tap in yet.
And recognize that there's 3.1 million and growing people living in the watershed, and some of those are individual properties and households that need to contribute to the protection of the bay too.
How much money do you have in excess?
There's I think around 400,000.
What about living shorelines projects? Flip my Florida shoreline to something besides a seawall.
That would certainly be consideration too. I think Dave's point on who that might benefit would be skewed to.
Yeah, waterfront property is generally more expensive, but there are communities that are near the water that might benefit.
Well, and just so you all are aware too, we did fund through the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, this latest iteration, a project where we're investing in developing living shoreline plans for private ownership. So we're not actually paying for the actual installation of a living shoreline along the private property, but we are trying to evaluate whether or not providing those planning and permitting costs could be removing a barrier. And then Blake is following up and doing the social science research to identify whether or not those costs and permitting related challenges are indeed the barriers to the behavior change, or if there are other things like perceptions about viewshed or something else that he might discover along the way. So we might have better insights into how to craft an appropriate program based on some of this work that we're conducting right now.
Yeah, that's excellent.
I think also the ideas that you've brought up here are good ideas, and if you have more of them, I would love to hear them from you as they pop up in your head too.
This is just an idea, trying to kind of create a through line between all of these. You have so many activities in the CCNP. What if every year, or every 2 years, you kind of identify some priority activities, and then that's where you're putting this excess funding towards? So that way you're kind of touching on all of these, like maybe 1 year it's septic to sewer, and then you have a few projects related to that you fund, or living shorelines, or some other, but maybe not aligned with your work plan that you guys are doing every year, every you do that, and that kind of shapes where you're putting the excess funding. So you're touching on all these different projects.
Yeah, we kind of batted around the idea. If you recall, during the pandemic, we developed what was called a digital challenge grant, and we're thinking about generalizing that just to a challenge grant that might be a rotating priority like you suggest. And it's just a matter of what funding source would go towards those challenge grants at that point.
I'll offer, when it comes to private properties and motivating individuals, particularly in affluent areas, the financial incentive isn't always the most compelling thing to offer. So I just encourage you to explore other ways of incentivizing behavior changes.
That, to Maya's point, Blake is investigating that now, particularly related to living shoreline installations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate that input as well. We had one more staff update. We actually had an event this past weekend. The debris derby at E.G. Simmons Park, and Sheila's going to kind of give you an overview. I actually have a slide as well and a short video to present to y'all.
Yeah, so as Ed mentioned, and you guys have heard me kind of talk about this event for a while now, because we've been planning it for like 8 months. But this past weekend, we held the Tampa Bay Debris Derby. We're hoping this is kind of the first trash collection tournament, and we do it each year annually. So for this event, we partnered with Power Pole and Skinny Water Culture, both who are kind of industry leaders. They're private companies. And then we also partnered with OceanAid 360 and Tampa Bay Waterkeeper to host this event. So overall, we had 40 teams participate in this collection tournament. So teams were on boats, they were on paddle boards and kayaks, and they were also collecting trash from on land. So people were allowed to collect trash from anywhere in the Tampa Bay watershed. And what was really great is when we were talking to people, they said that they were like scouting out different areas over the past couple of weeks. So that was really fun. There was a lot of excitement around this event. So in total, we collected over 4,600 pounds of trash. So we actually filled a 30-yard dumpster, which is like one of the largest dumpsters that you can rent. We had about 30 prizes that different industries or different industry organizations donated to us. Those prizes included coolers, a power pole, spikes, sports tickets, as well as fishing trips. So really there was something for everybody. And so basically how we set it up to where like one bag of trash or one large item like a tire or an anchor would each equal one raffle prize, or excuse me, one raffle ticket, and then you entered your raffle tickets into the different prizes. So this kind of leveled the playing field so that even small teams just picking up trash on the land would be able to potentially win some of these prizes. But then we also did have a special prize for the team that collected the most amount of trash by weight, and we coined them the heavyweight champion of the tournament.
The year.
For the year. So in my opinion, this was a huge success. We had a lot of industry partners participating. A lot of the teams that participated were organizations that donated raffle prizes. So in my mind, this really helped us to expand our message outside of the usual crew that we're talking to. So Ed has a short recap video that Kyo Boatworks produced for us. So. Oh no.
It's going to probably create echo. Right. Or if you could play it up there, because it's going to create echo if I turn on my speakers.
What's up, guys? It's Justin Tramble with Tampa Bay Waterkeeper, and welcome to the first ever Tampa Bay Debris Derby. Hopefully this is the start of something that we do annually. We've got a lot of industry folks, a lot of just the community excited to be here today and participating, picking up trash all over the Tampa Bay estuary and bringing it here to E.G. Simmons Park. It's just really exciting to see it all come together and people getting really pumped up to pick up some trash. On behalf of the Tampa Bay Debris Derby Event Committee, thank you for everybody that showed up today to clean up the bay. We collected over, what, 2 tons plus? Right. Yeah, so thank you guys very much. We'll see you next year. What's up, guys? It's Justin.
Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. Noah actually they put together a team and they won the heavyweight champion belt. So maybe next year you guys will put together a team and compete to win that heavyweight champion belt.
What was the strangest item?
Oh, the strange was somebody picked up this like strange rock thing with like a face in it, and I'm pretty sure it was cursed. But they took it. They really liked it, and they like took it home with them. That was the strangest item in our opinion. Yeah, you don't put it in their garden. Sure, it was cursed, but
There was also a very large filing cabinet that someone found in the microbes.
yeah.
The heaviest item was, like, single item was there, the very large buoy that was collected. I think it took, I don't know, 3 or 4 of big strong men.
A great event.
It was really fun.
Congratulations.
Thanks for all your work on it.
Thanks for all the team that helped support it.
That's it for staff reports.
Okay. Next item, technical advisory report. You or Kelly? Is Kelly still with us?
Kelly is still online, but I'm happy to kind of summarize things. You can see all of the publications that we issued over the last quarter are listed here, as well as updating some of our open science products. Our technical team's been busy presenting information to our management community partners. We've also been doing a whole lot of field work, wrapping up some of the old Tampa Bay assessments over the summer, as well as making sure that our seagrass monitoring program, everything was completed in October so that we can get those results up on our dashboard and share that all with you. We also have some new work that we've been initiating to assess another phase of shipwake impacts on seagrass resources, this time in the North Shore Park vicinity, and then also some crowdsourcing information about brown pelicans and the new regulations that have gone into effect on fishing tackle at the Skyway Pier. We held 5 committee meetings. All of the agendas and presentations are linked if there's anything that you're curious about, but the team has been very busy over the past quarter, doing good work with you and your teams.
Any questions for Maya? Okay. Next is the Community Advisory Committee report.
Yeah, so the Community Advisory Committee met on October 25th in person, which was great. At Weeden Island, we had a pretty good turnout and we had a lot of new members present. And it's really great having them there. There's got a lot of new people that have great energy and enthusiasm. We had presentations from Rick Anderson at EPA on the their criminal investigation division. Justin Tramble from Tampa Bay Waterkeeper talked about their patrol program and also the QR code stickers that they had made with Tampa Bay mini grant money to encourage people to report any kind of problem on the water, basically. Linked to their website where they have a lot of information about who to call for what. Blake gave us an update on the Hook Birds campaign and how they're surveying people out at the Skyway Bridge about the tackle changes and their attitudes toward that. And we also saw a film on Black Skinners that was, again, received funding from the Tampa Bay mini grants about their nesting out on Indian shores and the challenges that they have to, completing their nest cycle. The Manatee Awareness Subcommittee and the Social Science Subcommittee of the CAC have also both been active. This Manatee Awareness Subcommittee in particular has been meeting like every 2 weeks, I think, and are coming up with recommendations for how to get the word out to voters and other people about things they can do to protect manatees. Monday, we have a subcommittee meeting about the Tampa Bay mini grant criteria, where we're just going to talk about we have a list of recommended modifications to the grant criteria and evaluation criteria. And just the goals of that revision are just to simplify and clarify what we're putting out to grant applicants so that they understand what requirements are and what our expectations are. Also to provide some better guidance to the review committee because we've had new people on there. We want to make sure everybody is on the same page with how they're evaluating the mini grants applications. We also want to add points for environmental justice, add points for projects that incorporate the whatever chosen CCMP priority is for the year, and to update the points generally to better reflect the Tampa Bay mini grant program priorities, just their importance. There were things like that we're removing, like does the project use native plants, which a lot of the education programs don't. Not every restoration project uses plants generally, so things like that, just to make it the requirements consistently applied in all of the grant applications. So I think that's pretty much it. Did I forget anything?
Any questions for you? Thank you. Okay, final item or additional packet information, Maya.
Won't belabor this. You can see the smart sheet. You can click on there and you can drill down into individual projects if you want to know where things are at. If you have any questions about the overall dashboard summary or you want me to walk through individual project status updates, give me a holler and I'm happy to do that with you. Beyond this, we also have the next set of next year's meeting dates listed in the agenda packet. And so our next meeting is scheduled for February 9th in 2024. Meet here at 9 a.m.
Anything else? Anybody want? All right, well, with that, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. If we don't see you.
Yeah, happy holidays.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that people will see the two. Like I feel better in summarizing a higher.
If we had suffered through it, point exactly those two.
Like I said, at least it wasn't every meeting for 2 years.
Go back.
This wasn't ever, it's what it is. I'm on path. This- It's okay. It's not your fault. It was on a leg anyways. So I have like, the battery died in it, so I have an aftermarket battery in there, which like moves it to a blue screen, and then I have to rebuild it if it power is disconnected. So I needed to shut down, so everything that I had and possibly the machine, but that's not your fault, that's just where it is. See, the 10-year-old laptop. So, like, Here you are. So please, thank you. That's fine.
I mean, not every.
Certainly people want to